These are the recorded lectures for Chapter 23, the Angiosperms. This is also from Section 23.5. Angiosperm means, angio means covered, sperm means seed. So these are seeds that are covered with a fruit. And if you have fruit, you also have a flower. So the angiosperms are the flowering plants. They are called angiosperms because their ovules are always enclosed within diploid tissues, meaning fruit. The angiosperms are an exceptionally large and successful group of plants. There are 352,000 known species of angiosperms. They range in size from the duckweed to over 100 meters tall, like your redwood trees. All of our fruits, vegetables, nuts, herbs, and grains, which are the staples of the human diet, are angiosperms. Angiosperms provide us with clothing, food, medicines, and other commercially valuable products. All right, so this is a picture of an angiosperm, Amborella trichopoda. I just want to see something. Amborella trichopoda. Okay, so this is thought to be one of the first or the first flowering plant. All right, angiosperms are divided into monocots and dicots or eudicots. Monocot stands for monocotyledon. Examples of monocots include corn, tulips, pineapples, and sugarcane plants. The eudicots or eudicotyledons include the cactus, strawberries, dandelions, poplars, and beans. The word cotyledon means seed leaf. So they are the seed leaves containing nutrients that nourish the embryo. And monocots have one cotyledon in the seed, and eudicots have two cotyledons in the seed. So here is a table that compares the two types of angiosperms. Monocots have one cotyledon and eudicots have two. Another way is you can look at the seed, and if you can easily split it in half, it's from a eudicot. Think about your beans and think about a lima bean or a kidney bean. You can just take that seed and break it in half, and there are two equal halves. But think about a corn seed that is a monocot. That's just one, like you really can't half it, and into a symmetrical halves. So in monocots, the flower parts, like the petals, are in threes or multiples of three. So you'll have three flowers or three petals or six or nine, whereas eudicots, the flower parts are in fours or fives or multiples of 4 or 5. In monocots, the pollen grain has one pore. In eudicots, the pollen grain has 3 pores. Usually monocots are herbaceous, and eudicots can be woody or herbaceous. So your eudicots are going to be trees. They're going to include your trees. The monocot leaves have parallel venation or parallel veins, and eudicots, the venation is a net pattern. The stem, if you slice the stem crosswise or I can't think. If you slice the stem and look at it, there are scattered bundles, whereas in the eudicots, if you slice the stem, the vascular bundles are in a ring. They form a ring pattern. They're scattered and don't really have much of a pattern in the monocots. And the monocots have a fibrous root system, which is very branching but short, and the eudicots have a long taproot system. So just looking at some pictures, this is a monocot. You can see that there are 1, 2, 3 flower petals. There are 1, 2, 3 sepals. And the male structure is called the anthers. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that is threes or multiples of threes. And then you have the eudicot here has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petals. I can't really count the sepals, but I can see 5 male parts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The flower parts, flowers, the leaves that enclose the flower when it's still a bud, and their function is to protect the bud, are called the sepals. All together, all the sepals together are called the calyx, and all of the petals are called the corolla. The male structures in a flower are called the stamens, and the stalk is the filament, and then the structure that's attached to the filament is the anther. The anther produces pollen. So if I were to ask you which structure is analogous to the human testicle, you would say the anther. The female structure is called the carpel and sometimes the pistil. And it's got 3 regions. The stigma is the tip, and the stigma is sticky, so that pollen will stick to it. The stalk is called the style, and then the enlarged base that's enlarged and rounded is called the ovary. It encloses 1 or more ovules, which become the seeds, and the ripened ovary becomes the fruit. So here is a picture of flower structures. You can see all of the petals, which are called the corolla. You can see one of the sepals, and all the sepals together are called the calyx. We're looking at a flower here that has flower parts in 5s. So this is a eudicot. It's a lily. The male structures, the anthers would be hard to count in this picture, but the stamens are the male structures. The tip is the anther, the stalk is the filament. The female structure is in the center here, and it is called the carpel. The tip of it is the stigma. Then you have the style, and then you have the ovary, and inside the ovule or egg. All right, life cycle of flowering plants. The flowering plants are heterosporous. That means they produce 2 types of spores, a megaspore, which is the female structure, and then a microspore, which is the male structure. So the megaspore is located in the ovule, and it develops into an egg-bearing female gametophyte called the embryo sac. All right, so here we have the name of the female gametophyte structure. It's the embryo sac, okay? The embryo sac usually has 7 cells. 1 is an egg. 1 contains 2 polar nuclei. And then there are 5 more, but the ones that you need to know are the egg and the polar nuclei. And the male structure is the microspore, which is produced within the anther and becomes the pollen grain. So we know that a mature microspore is a pollen grain, and that is the male gametophyte. The male gametophyte has 3 cells. There's a tube cell and 2 sperm cells. And what we need to worry about are the 2 sperm cells. During pollination, pollen is transported from the anther to the stigma. It can be on the same flower, or it can be on a different flower. The tube cell produces a pollen tube, so that's the function of one of those 3 cells. The tube cell produces a pollen tube, and the 2 sperm travel through the tube to the ovule. Now, the fertilization is called double fertilization because of the 2 sperm. One of those sperm unites with an egg and forms a diploid zygote. The other sperm unites with the two polar nuclei. That gives us 3 nuclei, or triploid endosperm nucleus. And that zygote becomes the embryo, and the endosperm becomes the food. So the ovule then becomes a seed, and the seed contains the embryo and the stored food from the endosperm, enclosed within a seed coat. The fruit is the ripened ovary. And here's our life cycle, and it goes through what happens. This one is really hard, the life cycle of angiosperms. So make sure that you study and kind of go over a few times on your own or with a friend. Go over that double fertilization process. Let's blow it up and just go over that part of it. Okay, so we have pollen landing on the stigma, and one of the cells, called the tube cell, grows into a pollen tube. The other 2 cells are the sperm, and one of those sperm fertilizes the egg. Notice how there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cells in here inside of this ovary. One of those cells becomes the egg. These are the 2 polar nuclei. Now, the cells that are not mentioned play various roles, but we are only going to be concerned about what happens to the egg and the polar nuclei. One of the sperm fertilizes the egg, the other sperm fertilizes the polar nuclei. And so the fertilized egg becomes the zygote, and the fertilized polar nuclei become the endosperm. And that's important. That's the process of double fertilization. Oh, I don't know why I was going to end show. Okay, so as far as the diversity of flowers, wind-pollinated flowers are usually not showy. They might be pretty, but they're not, they're just not brilliant, brightly colored, just not showy. Bird-pollinated and insect-pollinated flowers are often brightly colored. They're often very colorful. And night-blooming flowers attract nocturnal mammals or insects. They are normally white or cream-colored, and they're going to smell really good. They're going to be aromatic because it's not their color, it is their smell that attracts pollinators. Now, this is the last slide, and there are just some terms that are especially for flowers. If we say a flower is complete, then it has all 4 parts. So there are flowers that don't have all 4 parts. But if the flower has sepals, petals, stamens, and carpels, remember the stamens are the male parts and the carpels are the female parts, then we call it a complete flower. If it lacks one or more of the 4 parts, we call it incomplete. So if it's a flower, for example, with everything but stamens, we would call it incomplete. Now, if it's perfect, it has both stamens and carpels. So you can have a complete and perfect flower, or it can be imperfect, and that means it has stamens or carpels, but not both. So what we would say, if it's incomplete and lacks stamens, we would say it's imperfect. Or if it's incomplete and lacks carpels, we would say it's imperfect. A cluster of flowers is called an inflorescence, and something that appears to be a single flower, but it's actually a group of tiny flowers, is called a composite flower.